Another one of Satori Software's Wednesday webinars. Today's topic is going to be Post-Presort 101, the basics. Before we get started here, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping throughout the session today. If you have any questions, feel free to type those into the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen in that GoToWebinar panel there, and we'll make sure that we get all of those questions answered for you today. Also, as we go throughout the session today, we are recording this session, and we are going to be posting both the recording and a copy of all of these slides on our website, and that'll be available in just a few days on our website. So let's go ahead and get into today's topic. Before we get started here, I do want to introduce who's on the phone with us today. My name is Kim Mock, and I'm the Postal Product Specialist here at Satori Software. And we talk a lot about intelligent mail and electronic documentation in these webinars, and that'll definitely be a really big focus today. Also on the line today, we have Jean Rainier, and she is a technical support specialist here at Satori, and she specializes in Post-Presort products. And so she's going to be answering questions in that questions panel on the GoToWebinar screen there throughout the session today, and we're happy to have her here to answer questions that we have, and so everybody gets a really good introduction to Post-Presort software. So let's take a look at what we're actually going to be covering today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is electronic documentation. We're going to talk about what is it, why you would want to use it, and some different options that you can use to satisfy the electronic documentation requirement for full service. We're going to talk a lot about Mail.dat, because when we talk about Post-Presort software, and the majority of the time we're talking about modifying your Mail.dat file. And so we'll talk about why you would create a Mail.dat file, how you can manage it, and what information is actually in that file. Then when we talk about Post-Presort, the thing that we want to know is where does the presort come from? So we're going to talk about what presort does, what its role is in the mail process here, and what it does and what it doesn't do. And then we'll talk about Post-Presort software and all of the different functionality that's available for Post-Presort software that could make your mailing processes a lot more streamlined. And then, of course, at the end, we will have a Q&A, and we have Jean on the line to help us through that, to make sure that we get all of your questions answered, and to make sure that we get a good, complete understanding of what Post-Presort software is. So let's start with electronic documentation. So when we're talking about submitting your mailing to the post office accepts a couple different forms of documentation. One is a paper or a printed form. So if you're used to printing out your Form 3602 or your Form 3600 for first-class mail, and you're used to taking that along with your mail to the post office, you'll normally see the postal clerk entering in all the information from your postage statement into a computer. So what electronic documentation does is it actually takes all of that information that would be in your printed forms, and it puts it into an electronic format that automatically sends that information directly into Postal One, which is that program that mail clerk is using to enter that information into the USPS system. Now, when we're talking about electronic documentation, there's actually a lot of information that's stored inside of the files that are used in electronic documentation. It contains all the information that's needed to generate a postage statement, to create your qualification report, so all of the outlines of which trays are included and how they're put together there. It also includes all of the information about intelligent mail. So if you're moving to intelligent mail full service, then electronic documentation is a very, very important step in that process. Again, all of that information from electronic documentation is uploaded into Postal One, which is that USPS system that contains all of the mailings that the post office is processing. And basically, by using electronic documentation, you're able to completely replace the majority of the reports that you would be printing out in paper form. So you'll still need your tray labels, you'll still need your pallet labels, but for the majority of your paperwork, that's all going to be done electronically. So why would you want to use electronic documentation? Well, other than the post office really encouraging mailers to use this, it does include all the information from your printed paperwork, and because it replaces all of that printing, you're not going to have to spend money on paper and supplies. Also, because you're taking out the human component of someone actually typing in all that information into a computer, you reduce any manual entry errors. So if someone accidentally transposes a number or mistakes your permit for somebody else's, then all that information could get entered in incorrectly into Postal One. So by doing electronic documentation, it's going to take that out of the equation. Also, because that person isn't going to have to key in everything manually, it's going to save time when you're entering your mail at the post office. And really the key thing for mailers to remember right now is the post office is intending to require full service for all mailings starting in January 2014. So in just about a year here, the post office really wants all mailers to be using full service. And in order to do full service, you will need to use electronic documentation. Also, if you want to qualify for any of the postal initiatives, so for the mobile barcode discounts and all the additional discounts that the post office is offering this year, you will need to use electronic documentation in order to qualify for those discounts. So let's talk a little bit about the different ways that you can satisfy the electronic documentation requirement. There are 3 different types of electronic documentation that the post office accepts. There's a system called the Postal Wizard, which is basically a website where you're going to be typing in all that information from your postage statement. You can use Mail.dat, and Mail.dat is a database that contains all the information about your mailing. Or you can use Mail.xml, and Mail.xml is a messaging system that just sends over the pertinent information about your mailing. Now, with all 3 of these different types of electronic documentation, you'll be sending all this information directly into Postal One, and when it does that, then you're going to get a job ID that's going to be assigned to your mailing. So rather than printing out your postage statement and taking that to the post office so they can enter it into the system, you'll just take this job ID with you along with your trays and your tray barcodes and everything, and you'll take that job ID, and then the postal clerk will be able to look up your job based on that ID and be able to enter the mail. So let's talk a little bit about Mail.dat, because when we're talking about Post-Presort software, we are going to be talking about handling the Mail.dat files. So Mail.dat, like I said, really is a database, and it contains just about everything you need to know about that mailing except the addresses that you use to form that mailing. So it's not going to contain anything that says 123 Main Street, but it contains just about everything else in there. It's going to contain all the information for your postage statements. If you're doing drop shipment, it's going to contain all of that information, your qualification reports. It'll also contain all the information about your intelligent mail barcodes. So it's going to contain all your piece barcodes, all of your tray barcodes, and your pallet barcodes, so that so if you need to, you can actually reprint quite a few of those as well. It also tells the post office which barcodes you're going to be using for this mailing, which allows the post office to uniquely track all of the pieces that you're sending with this mailing as well. Now, Mail.dat is an established industry standard. Just about everybody in the mailing industry that handles electronic documentation uses the Mail.dat file, because it's actually it's a specification that's not managed by the post office. So there's an independent group called ID Alliance, and that's IDE Alliance. And basically, what ID Alliance does is they're a specification management organization, and they are the ones that kind of define how each of the files are laid out in the Mail.dat database and what information should be in the fields and how everything should be laid out. And basically what Mail.dat can be used for is actually transmitting your mailing information from your company to a third party, whether you're using a logistics provider or some type of a mail consolidator, or directly to the post office. And because Mail.dat is very flexible and it contains quite a bit of information about your mailing, you can describe just about any mailing you can imagine using the Mail.dat specification. So it's very, very flexible. So again, it is that established standard, and it contains all the data about your mailing. Now, most software packages, logistics providers, service bureaus, consolidators, and the post office do support Mail.dat, and so Mail.dat has been around for many, many years now, and just about everyone has adopted this as the de facto standard for communicating mail information. And you can use it for just about any type of a mail job. You can use it for a very basic standard mail mailing, all the way up to really complex co-mail and consolidated jobs as well. So now let's talk a little bit about pre-sort. So pre-sort is what you're probably used to inside of the Satori products that you have today, their bulk mailer or Marum toolkit. And what pre-sort does is it's going to take all of the addresses that you have in your mail list, and it's going to prepare them in trays and sacks and pallets. And basically what it's doing is it's taking all of those addresses and ordering them based on DMM regulations. So it knows that for in order to get a certain rate, we need a certain number of pieces going to a certain destination, and it's going to make sure that each of those trays and sacks is created properly. So once that's done, then you basically have a mailing that's ready to prepare. Now, of course, in order to do that, we do need to make sure that the addresses that we're preparing are correct. So you do need to run through a CAS certified process to correct all those addresses, get that delivery point information, and of course, any program that's using this pre-sort technology, you would want to have them be a PAVE certified program. And PAVE and CAS are actually both USPS programs that basically ensure the quality of the software program to make sure that they're correcting addresses correctly and also that they're preparing the mailing correctly according to those DMM regulations. Now, after the pre-sort process is done on your list, then you're going to be able to get the mailing documentation. Now, you can print that out onto your normal 3602 and your qualification reports, or you can actually save the electronic documentation as a Mail.dat file or a Mail.xml message. And then also, pre-sort does allow you to print out some additional documentation to help you prepare and manage those trays and sacks. Now, the next step is what do we do if something happens after we've prepared the pre-sort and something happens and something changes while we're on the production floor. So after we've sorted the list using pre-sort, then that mailing list is actually transferred to your production floor so that you can start printing your addresses, start putting them in trays, and start preparing that mailing for actual entry into the post office. Now, anytime we're in this environment where things are happening all the time, we've got a lot of machines that are running, there's maybe a limited space on your floor, there are all types of variables that can happen after the pre-sort, but before you're actually sending that mailing out to the post office. And so there are a lot of last-minute updates that may need to be changed, but you may not want to actually take all the mail out of those trays and resort them, or maybe you don't want to go back and re-pre-sort and have to start all over and waste some paper stock. And so what the solution that we have to handle that, we call Post-Presort software. And so Post-Presort software is a way for you to take the mailing documentation that you already have that was generated by your pre-sort product there, and it allows you to make those last-minute changes that are necessary to make sure that what you're entering into the post office is matching what you're actually saying you're entering. So what you can do with this Post-Presort software is you can augment it. So if you need to add additional information, maybe the person that you're mailing for changed, maybe you need to add a CRID to your electronic documentation because you forgot to do that in your pre-sort product, or if you just want to make sure that that Mail.dat file was generated in a way that the post office is going to accept, you can actually validate it against those USPS specifications. Another really powerful thing that Post-Presort software can do is it actually allows you to manage those trays on pallets. So if you have a mailing and it created 5 pallets and then you have some trays that are left over and you just want to be able to put that mail on a pallet so that you can get that to the post office in a really efficient way, you can do that with Post-Presort software. You can also take many mailings, and if you want to combine trays from many mailings onto a single pallet that are all going to the same destination, that will allow you to really maximize the postal discounts for those pieces that are in those trays. So you can work a lot with pallets, and also you can take a look at some of the shipping costs to make sure that if you are drop shipping, that you are going to be getting the best discount based on the cost of having to do that drop shipment. So another thing that you can do is when you're talking about drop shipment forms is if you need to change anything about which places you're going to be dropping your mail off, how you're going to be handling that, which logistics provider you're going to use, you can update your Form 8125, which is going to be your drop shipment form that the post office requires for anyone who's doing that drop shipment there. Another really powerful thing that Post-Presort software does is it handles creating pallets according to several different ways. So one of the things is with Presort software, it's generally just going to be preparing that mail according to DMM regulations. However, if you're a first-class mailer, you may have what's called a CSA. It's called a Customer Supplier Agreement. And in a CSA, basically what the post office has done is they've created an agreement with you that you're going to actually be preparing your mailing slightly different than what the DMM says because of the way that your mailings are created and how they want to be able to process your mail. They may require you to separate out your mail a little bit differently than the majority of the public. And so in order to satisfy that requirement, you'll need to move some of the trays from one pallet to another pallet or something along those lines. And so in order to satisfy that CSA requirement, we definitely recommend that you use Post-Presort software to do that because it's going to make sure that all of those separations are handled properly. Now, of course, if you're doing drop shipments and you're using full service, you are required to schedule your appointments using FAST, which is the Facility Access and Shipment Tracking System that the post office has in place. It's a way for you to schedule those appointments so the post office knows exactly when your mail is coming and how much mail you're actually going to be sending. That way they have enough space on their dock to accept your mailing there. So you can make FAST appointments inside of your Post-Presort software. Also, if there's anything that happens that basically makes it so that there aren't as many pieces in the mailing than what you actually intended to ship. So, for example, if there were some misprints that happened while you were processing that mailing, or maybe you thought you had 50,000 pieces to mail, but you really only had 45,000, then you may have what they call either spoilage or shortage. So spoilage are usually misprints. Shortages are when you actually don't have as many pieces and you have to cut that mail off at the end there. So what you can do with Post-Presort software is you can actually mark those pieces as spoiled or shorted pieces and then adjust your postage to make sure that you're not paying for those pieces that you're not actually mailing. There's a couple other things that we want to talk about with Post-Presort. The first is how does it work? And basically, everything inside of Post-Presort is working with your Mail.dat files. And basically what you would do is you'd be able to import all of your Mail.dat files into your Post-Presort product, and then you can start working with them. You can work with one Mail.dat file at a time and just make sure that all of the information is loaded properly, that it matches with the USPS Postal One specifications. You can make sure that you're getting the best discounts, make sure that you're drop shipping to the places that make sense for that mailing. But you can also use Post-Presort software to combine multiple mailings. And this is where it gets really powerful, because what you can do is you can actually take trays from different mailings, combine them because they're going to the same location, and then you can drop ship them to that location, and you can get that drop ship discount for all of that mail, but only be sending one pallet. So you're not going to be spending as much on logistics costs just by combining that mail into a single pallet. And of course, you can take a look at all of the shipping costs and things like that. So you can actually see, okay, if I'm going to be sending my mail down to San Francisco, it's going to cost me $200. And if I'm going to be saving $300, then maybe that's going to be something that's worthwhile for me. So let's talk a little bit about some common changes that can happen after that pre-sort has been done, but before you're actually releasing that out to the post office. Now, the really common things that can change are going to be your piece weight and your mailing date and your ad percentage. Those are things that that can vary very widely from when you're doing your pre-sort to when the mail is actually produced. So, for example, you may be preparing your mailing, doing your pre-sort a couple weeks in advance of actually printing out that mail piece. And as you know, customers can change their minds at the very last minute and say, for example, at the last minute they wanted to insert a couple more sheets into that envelope and make that piece weight just slightly different than what you had told your pre-sort program. Well, what can happen with post-presort software is you can modify that piece weight without actually having to change the trays and that pre-sort documentation that you've already created. Another thing is for periodical mailers, there's a field called ad percentage, which is a very important field because that does calculate how much postage you're going to be using. And sometimes you don't know until the very last minute when you're ready to start printing that periodical exactly what that ad percentage is going to be for that mailing. Also, some things can happen that can change which mailing date you're actually going to be sending that mail. Sometimes a machine goes down, or someone calls in sick, or maybe we're ready to start producing that mail a day early because of we've been really efficient lately. So that mailing date can change pretty easily, and in that case, we would want to make sure that the electronic documentation reflects that. Now, there is some information that's very, very critical inside of your Mail.dat file that is required for full service, and it's required to be correct. And that's going to be the mailer IDs and the customer registration IDs, or the CRIDs, for all of the entities that are involved in this mailing. And so this information the post office calls the by for. So who's the mailing by, so who's actually preparing the mailing, and then who's the mailing for, and that's usually the mail owner. And the post office is very specific that they do want to make sure that for each mailing, the by for information is filled out properly with both a mailer ID and a customer registration ID for the mail owner and the mail preparer. So sometimes you don't know that information right off the bat. Maybe your customer doesn't know their CRID. I don't know if many companies that have that memorized. And so it may take a little while to get that information, and you may not be able to enter that into your pre-sort software when you're preparing the mailing there, but you would need to update that before you actually start sending that to the post office. So in that case, you can use this post-presort software to populate the MIDs and the CRIDs inside of your electronic documentation in your Mail.dat. Another thing that can happen is maybe you decide that you want to change how you're going to be doing your drop shipment. So maybe after preparing the mailing, you figure out you only have a half a pallet going to a certain destination, and you don't think that the cost really justifies doing that drop shipment. So you may want to change your documentation to match that. Also, in order to transport and enter a lot of this mail, you do want to have it on a pallet because it's a lot easier to move trays and containers via a pallet rather than just having them loose on your floor. So what you can do with post-presort software is actually take those loose containers and put them on a pallet and create a pallet tag for that. So let's talk a little bit more about pallets. So a really common request that we get from customers is support for co-palletization. And what is co-palletization? Co-palletization is a way for you to combine many mailings onto similar trays or similar pallets, and that way you can get postal discounts for all of the mail that's on that pallet going to that destination, but you actually have fewer pallets in the end. So if you have 3 mailings and all of them have some mail that's going to Chicago, and you want to be able to combine all of that mail that's going to Chicago, regardless of which mailing it's in, you'll be able to do that using co-palletization inside of your post-presort software. And basically what that does is that allows all of the pieces that are on that pallet to share the dropship discounts. So all of those pieces would get the same dropship discount to Chicago there. And the nice thing about that is you wind up having fuller pallets. And by having a more full pallet, you're able to use a lot more of your workspace, and also that way you're only going to be paying one shipment charge for all of your logistics providers. So there's a lot of benefits to doing co-palletization. So another thing that can happen is anytime there's some type of a problem when you're actually processing the mail. If a machine goes down and folds a bunch of pieces, or ink runs out and it smears over a bunch of pieces, and you just don't want to reprint them. This is really common in standard mailings, where maybe it's just not worth it to go back and reprint those pieces, having to figure out which ones you have to reprint, which ones were the problems. You just want to be able to throw those in the trash and remove them from your postage statement. Also, if you wind up running out of mailing stock, so if you run out of envelopes and you want to stop for the day at that point, then there's a way inside of your Post-Presort software where you can mark those pieces, and then it will recalculate all of your postage to make sure that you're just paying for the mail that you're actually sending. Now, another thing that's really common is sometimes you wind up processing mail and you only have enough time to manage about half of your mailing over the course of a day. So, for example, if you get a really big job and you can only process half of it that day, you can only get it onto trays, but you want to be able to get it out of your warehouse. You want to get that mail off to the post office. You want to get it started into the mail stream, and then you would process the rest of it the next day, or maybe a few days down the line when you've got the rest of that mail prepared. And that's called splitting a mailing. And so basically what you would be able to do inside of your Post-Presort software is select all those containers that you've already prepared for that day, create a separate Mail.dat file for just those containers, and then submit that to the post office, get that mailing going, and then you can go back later, collect all of those remaining pieces, all those remaining trays, and create a separate Mail.dat file for the rest of that mailing. So I guess the real question is why would you use Post-Presort software? Again, this is a way for you to really easily update all of your mailing documentation for any of the problems that can happen between pre-sort and actually sending that mail out the door. So anything you need to do to change your logistics settings or your dropship settings, updating any of that crucial mail piece information that's on there, handling all of your pallets to make sure that they're going to the right destination, and maybe combining them across multiple mailings just to maximize your space there. And then another thing that's really key with Post-Presort software is you can completely go through and validate that the Mail.dat files that you're going to be sending to the post office conform exactly with the USPS standards for Postal 1 Mail.dat files, and make sure that that file is going to be accepted by the post office. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and open it up to Q&A, and we have Jean Rainier on the line. She's, like I said, she's our technical support for our Post-Presort products, and she's been very helpful in letting me know what Post-Presort is all about and kind of what these products do. Hi, Jean. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Excellent.
We had a question, but I unfortunately couldn't answer their question through the question box.
Okay. All right. It looks like it says some of these changes seem pretty minor. Couldn't you just rerun the sort through the pre-sort software with a new mailing date, for instance? And for that, the answer for that, I think, and I think Jean would agree, is it really depends on how far into the production of the mail that you've gotten. Because sometimes if you've already started preparing that mail onto trays, you don't want to have to go back into your pre-sort software, because by rerunning the sort, there's a risk of those trays being prepared a little bit differently inside of your pre-sort. Is that about where we're at with that, Jean?
I'd agree.
Yeah. So it really becomes something that sometimes you just don't want to risk having a piece get pulled out of one tray and put into another one, because trying to manage that can be a little bit difficult.
I would think if it's something like mailing date, for example, and the person who's running the pre-sort is also going to be doing all the paperwork, getting the mail out the door, then putting in a mailing date, yes, there is that risk of trays changing, but you're in control of that. If, however, the person who's going to be working with the mail works, for example, different hours than you, let's say they work at night, they want to get the mail out the door, and so the mailing date has to be changed. That's where a post-presort software would help out.
Yep. Thanks. That's great, Jean. So the next question that came in says, is the industry moving towards Mail.xml and away from Mail.dat? I think the full service move update method address changes are in XML format. Could you talk a little bit about Mail.xml versus Mail.dat?
The industry as a whole has decided that the standard still is the Mail.dat. I think that the USPS has tried before to move to XML and has met resistance from the industry because the industry has what they consider more flexibility with the Mail.dat. Now, whether that's really true or not, debatable, but since it continues to be what the majority use, that's why there's products like ours to be able to manipulate Mail.dats.
Exactly. Yeah, I think because there are so many products and companies that have spent a lot of time developing solutions for Mail.dat software, Mail.xml is still relatively young in its life cycle in the mail system, and so and because Mail.dat has worked so well for so long, there's a little bit of a question of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So so I think Mail.dat is definitely going to be around for quite a while. The next question says, is Satori planning to move to Mail.xml in the future? And actually, there is a product called Bulk Mailer that Satori Software sells that actually already does support Mail.xml for electronic documentation. So, so if you do have the Bulk Mailer product and you're interested in that, I would definitely contact your account manager here at Satori to learn a little bit more about Mail.xml and the differences between the two. Now, we do have a few other webinars that we've conducted that have talked a lot more about electronic documentation in general. And if you haven't already, I would definitely recommend that you check them out. If you go to our webinars page on satorisoftware.com, there's a link there for our archived sessions, and you'll see there's a couple archived sessions there that you can take a listen to anytime, so they've been recorded just like this one, and you can go ahead and learn. There's one called From Zero to eDoc in Plain English that describes all of the different ways you can satisfy that electronic documentation requirement from the post office, and kind of the benefits and pitfalls of each. So if you want to get more information about Mail.dat versus Mail.xml versus the Postal Wizard, then I would definitely go ahead and check that out. The next question says, how far ahead of mail submission do you need to submit the job through Mail.dat?
Same day.
Okay.
Same day. And now, if you have a very large mailing, then you would do it the first day of that mailing. Your clerks are going to like it if you have it a little bit sooner, but you just have to have it in there an hour before, no, 2 hours before it actually mails out the door.
Right. So the next question asks, does Satori offer Post-Presort? And if not, what would you recommend as being the most compatible to work with Bulk Mailer? And actually, that goes straight to the heart of why we had this webinar today. We are actually we do have a solution by our Monticello group at Satori here, with a program called Mail.db. And Jean here is an expert in Mail.db. That's her concentration here at Satori, and we are definitely working very closely with her team to make sure that everything inside of Bulk Mailer works very well with the Mail.db program. So if you're interested in that, feel free to contact your account manager here at Satori Software, or you can contact John Kammerer, who's our sales associate who concentrates specifically on Post-Presort software, and we would be glad to answer any questions you have about compatibility with Bulk Mailer. Next question says, I was told that we, the mail agent, could we use our ID if the owner of the mail does not have one? Is this so inside of Mail.dat? And I guess the question would be, are you talking about the mailer ID or the CRID? So the post office, when you're talking about full service, really does want to have you enter the customer registration ID, the CRID, of both you and the owner of the mail. So if your customer, who's the owner of the mail, does not have a customer registration ID, then you can actually request those on behalf of your customer directly from the post office. And I'll send you a link offline here, Joyce, so that you can get that information. Okay, next question asks, since full-service mailings require unique IMBs, does that mean that we cannot print the address labels and tags ahead of time if we need to go back later to the mailing to just change something like the ad percentage, because that would change the IMB? So when you're talking about the actual barcode on the mail piece, that's not going to change if you're changing something like an ad percentage or a mail weight or something along those lines. But the actual order of those pieces in the tray and which tray that piece gets into may change if you're resorting the mail. So that's why you would use something like a Post-Presort product to actually change that ad percentage. Is that kind of your understanding, Jean?
Yeah, the only time your IMB would change would be if you changed it in Post-Presort software. For example, you had the wrong mailer ID and you decided to change the tray IMB, which that's the one that I could talk for about an hour on why you shouldn't do that. But anyway, changing your piece weight has no impact. And when you make a lot of the different editing, for example, if you change the thickness of a piece in our software, it's not going to change your tray makeup. But if you, for example, need sibling containers, then on the overflow, then you would have a new IMB. And that would be something that you definitely want to talk to us about before you did that.
Yep. All right. The next question asks, has Monticello software been acquired by Satori, and will Monticello be integrated into Bulk Mailer, Mirum Toolkit, or standalone? So I can talk a little bit about that. We have acquired the Monticello software and the Monticello software team, and Jean has been working on the Monticello team for many years now, as have many of the other employees of Monticello. As far as integration goes, we're still investigating exactly what we're going to be doing there, but we are working very closely with Jean and the Monticello team to make sure that everything that we're producing from the Presort side is going to be working very well with the Post-Presort products that are managed by Monticello. The next question is this mainly for mailers who use pallets? We are a small mailing company, and I feel most of this does not apply. Jean, do you want to talk about that?
If you move to full service, you're going to have to palletize in 2014. If you actually, Kim, I'm not sure. Are they going to, even without full service, are they going to start requiring pallets? I haven't heard anything about that yet.
Yeah, and I haven't heard too much about that either. However, even if you're not doing pallets, there sometimes can be situations where you would need to change the makeup of your mail before you actually submit that to the post office. So the post office has said that if you're taking your trays or containers onto a pallet and you're using that pallet to drop that mail off at the post office, then you do need to palletize your mail. And in that case, if you want to work with many different containers on pallets, then this can definitely help you out with that. Now, Post-Presort isn't for everybody, but there are quite a few reasons why you would want to take a look at it. If you'd like, Lena, go ahead and drop us a line, and we can contact you offline to get you more information about that. All right, the next question is are we filling this out in Satori and then uploading to Mail.dat? And basically what it is the products that you're probably using today, which is either Bulk Mailer or Mirum Toolkit, will actually create the initial Mail.dat file for you. And then you can save that file, and if you're using the Post-Presort product, then you would import it into Post-Presort to make those additional changes. So, so it's not a matter of uploading into Mail.dat, but after you've made all of your changes in Post-Presort, that's when you would upload that into Postal One. The next question is, how easy is Post-Presort software to use? Will we need to have an IT person or a programmer on staff? Jean, do you want to talk about that?
No, the software is pretty easy to install. There's an instruction guide on installation. The software itself is a lot of command buttons to make it easier for you to find things. There's also a menu of several different job functions, and within the different menu items we are pretty descriptive on which one is for which function, and you also receive training on the software, so that, and you've got product support that can walk you through things if you forget about it.
Great. Okay. Next question asks, if I'm understanding, if the original pre-sort was correct, then bulk mailer will upload to Postal One automatically, including dropship information. If I'm following this, who creates the 8125 dropship forms? So if you haven't made any changes after you've done your pre-sort, then you wouldn't need to upload that into your post-pre-sort software, and you could use those 8125 forms that were generated out in your bulk mailer product. But if you do make any changes inside of the post-presort product, then I would recommend reprinting those 8125 forms directly out of the post-presort system, so out of Mail.db. Okay, looks like that covers most of the questions that we had for today. If you have any questions after the session today, feel free to contact John Kammerer. He's our salesperson who's concentrates specifically on our post-presort products. You can also contact the webinars at satorisoftware.com email address, and we'll be glad to forward your question to anyone who can answer that for you. We do want to mention that we are going to be having a webinar next week that's going to be a case study. We're actually going to be inviting one of our customers who is using Post-Presort software today to talk about their experience with it and see exactly what they've been doing inside of that program to make their processes more streamlined and to save them a little bit of money. So, so if you can, go ahead and sign up for that webinar next week, and you'll learn a little bit more about this product. Again, if you have any additional information, feel free to contact us here at Satori Software, and we'll be posting the recording of this session and also a copy of the slides to our webinar page here in just a couple days. So I want to thank you, everyone, for coming to the session today. I hope you learned a lot, and we'll see you again for another webinar. Thank you.